The last thing I saw before passing out on the emergency table was my father walking away. And the next time I saw him, he was the one dying. And I was the only one who could save him. You know that moment when your whole life changes. Not with warning, not with ceremony. Just snap like the cracking of a bone or the hiss of a flat tire. That's how it happened to me. I was 16 years old. It was a rainy Thursday. The kind of rain that doesn't pour, it pounds. I remember standing on the sidewalk outside our house, arms wrapped tight around myself because I had just gotten into another fight with my father. The last one, though I didn't know it yet. He had been shouting at me again about school. Said I was a waste of space, that I had no ambition, that I was just like my mother. He didn't mean it as a compliment. I waited for the storm to pass before trying to cross the street. But the storm inside me was worse than the one outside. I didn't see the car. It came out of nowhere. A blur of silver, skidding, swerving, brakes screaming against the slick pavement. Then impact. And then silence. I remember the crunch of my bones before I felt the pain. I remember the sky being upside down. And I remember the panic not from others, but inside me. Because I couldn't move. My legs were twisted at impossible angles. My head was bleeding. My mouth tasted like iron and rainwater. And yet, as the world blurred, I remember hoping, begging, that someone would come for me. Someone did. An ambulance. I must have passed out after that. But when I came to, I was on a gurney, wheeling fast through cold hospital corridors. Lights flickering past like stars I couldn't quite reach. I heard voices rushed, clipped, panicked. She's critical. Internal bleeding. Get her in too. Trauma. Someone called for blood. Another for a surgeon. And then I saw him, my father. He was standing by the emergency desk. Completely dry. Like he hadn't even tried to help me. Like he had taken the time to change his shirt. He looked annoyed, not scared, not worried, just inconvenienced. A nurse approached him with a clipboard. Sir, your daughter's insurance. He cut her off with a cold shrug. She's not worth it. She's not worth it. You'd think the pain of shattered ribs or crushed vertebrae would be the worst part of getting hit by a car. It's not. It's hearing your father call you worthless while you're bleeding to death. I remember the nurse arguing with him, telling him I needed immediate surgery, that the insurance approval could come later, that they could figure out a payment plan, and my father? He walked away, turned his back on me, on my body, on the daughter he brought into this world. I remember screaming, not out loud, because I couldn't speak. My lungs were too full of fluid, but inside my head, I screamed so hard I thought I'd shatter. That's when another face appeared above me. A woman, middle-aged, kind eyes, fierce voice. Her name tag said Nurse Evelyn. I'm not letting her die on my table, she said through gritted teeth, and then darkness swallowed me again. They told me later that I flatlined twice. I don't remember it, obviously. I just remember that nothingness, that strange, cold peace, like floating underwater and not caring if you ever rise again. But I did. I woke up 2 days later in ICU, barely able to breathe. My body wrapped in gauze, metal and tape. Tubes in places tubes should never go. And no visitors, no flowers, no father, just silence. And that's when I realized something deep and permanent. I didn't have a father anymore, not in the way that matters. That was the day everything changed. Not just because my spine had to be rebuilt, or because I couldn't walk for months. It was the day I became my own reason to live, and I didn't know it then. But one day, the man who left me on that table would come crawling back to it, only next time I would be standing over him, and that was going to be a very different story. The pain of waking up after surgery is nothing compared to the pain of realizing no one came for you. I was hooked to machines. Tubes ran in and out of me like I was some kind of broken science project. Beeps, drips, alarms. But the worst sound of all was the emptiness in the room. No visitors, no family, no father. I stared at the ceiling tiles for hours, sometimes days, tracing the cracks like they held answers. Every morning a nurse would come in, chipper voice trying to sound normal. "Good morning, sweetheart. Today's a new day, new day." Same pain. It took me almost a week before I could speak. When I finally did, the first thing I whispered was, Is my dad here?" The nurse Evelyn, the one who had fought for me, paused. And in that moment of silence, I already knew. "No," she said gently. "He hasn't checked in since the night you arrived." Just like that, it wasn't a question anymore. It was truth. Cold, unshakable truth. He'd left me when I was most broken. And what was worse, he hadn't even tried to fake concern. Not a card, not a call, not even a text message. Evelyn sat beside me on the bed and held my hand. "Some people," she said, "don't deserve the titles they're given. Being a parent is more than DNA." That stayed with me. More than DNA. I had shattered my pelvis, 2 ribs, and my left leg. My spine was bruised, my lungs partially collapsed, and I had a severe concussion. But all of it paled in comparison to the deep, gnawing ache of abandonment. Every day I'd hear other kids down the hall get visited. Balloons. Balloons everywhere. Laughter, tears, hugs. Meanwhile, I counted the ceiling tiles like they were my only company. Eventually, a woman in a tan suit and clipboard visited. Social worker. Her name was Miss Jenkins. She asked me questions I wasn't ready for. About home life. About what happened before the accident. I didn't lie, but I didn't tell the whole truth either. How could I? I was still wrapping my head around it all. But it was enough for Child Protective Services to open a case. A few days later, Miss Jenkins returned. She sat beside me with a softness that made me nervous. "Your father signed over your care to the state," she said. "He's not contesting custody." Just like that. I asked. "He gave me away." She nodded. I don't know what hurt more, being abandoned at the hospital or being so disposable that he didn't even fight for me after. And so I became a ward of the state. After 3 weeks in the hospital, I was transferred to a rehabilitation center for teens. That's where I met Clara. She was my foster guardian. Middle-aged, strong-built, glasses perched on her nose like she meant business. She used to be a nurse herself, retired early after her husband died. She had no kids of her own, and somehow she chose me. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was mercy. But the first time I arrived at her home in a wheelchair, arm still bruised, heart still shattered, she didn't flinch. "You like pancakes?" she asked. I nodded. "Well, good. I make them every Saturday. And just so you know, I won't ask about what he did to you until you're ready. But when you are, I'll be here. And if you never want to talk about him again, that's fine too." That night, I cried into a pillow that smelled like lavender. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel completely alone. My physical therapy was grueling. There were days I couldn't even hold my head up without help. But Clara pushed me, gently but firmly. "Every bone in your body can heal," she'd say. "But only if you believe it's worth healing." And every time she said that, I heard his voice in my head. She's not worth it. I started studying at home. Couldn't go to school yet, but Clara made sure I had books, worksheets, tutors, anything I needed. One night while flipping through a borrowed biology textbook, I stopped at a chapter on the cardiovascular system. Something about the human heart, how it keeps going, even after trauma hit me hard. I realized then, I didn't just want to heal, I wanted to understand the human body, master it, control it, because I never wanted to be helpless again. Clara caught me once watching a trauma documentary late at night. "You've got the bug," she said, smiling. "Medicine gets under your skin like that. I want to be a doctor," I told her. She just smiled and handed me a cup of tea. "Then you'd better start learning how to fight for people who don't think they're worth saving." I nodded. I had already started with myself. I didn't know then what kind of doctor I would be. I didn't know that one day I'd be called to the again, not as a victim, but as the one holding the scalpel. Or that lying on the table that day would be the same man who left me on mine. But fate has a cruel sense of humor, and my story was only just beginning. The funny thing about pain is that it becomes part of your routine if you live with it long enough. I got used to waking up stiff, got used to the dull ache in my bones, got used to the silence in my chest where a father's love was supposed to live. And eventually, I even got used to being called foster kid instead of someone's daughter. High school wasn't easy. Not when you're limping into the building with metal screws in your hips and rumors flying around about your real parents. Kids whispered, teachers pitted, and I endured. But I had Clara. Every evening, she'd ask me how my day was even when I didn't answer. She'd leave hot cocoa on my desk, even when I said I didn't want any. And when I sat crying in the bathtub because I couldn't twist my leg far enough to wash it on my own, she sat on the floor beside me and gently helped me without saying a word. There was no judgment with Clara, just presence, and presence was something I've never had before. I started volunteering at a local community clinic when I was 17. Just filing charts at first, organizing shelves, sometimes sitting at the front desk and saying, "Next, please." But every once in a while, a patient would look at me and say something like, "You've got kind eyes," or "You look like you've been through something." And they were right, because behind every chart, every prescription, every swollen ankle or fevered child, I saw pain. And I recognized it. Not just the kind that shows up on an X-ray, but the kind that comes from abandonment, neglect, being invisible. I wasn't just learning medicine. I was learning humanity. At home, I buried myself in books. Clara made a deal with me. She'd pay for one anatomy textbook per week, and I'd bake her one new recipe every weekend. So, I studied the circulatory system while baking banana bread, learned about neuroplasticity while whipping up mac and cheese. It was weird, and it worked. I wasn't the smartest girl in school, not by grades, but I was relentless, obsessed even. I couldn't afford to be anything else, because I was chasing something bigger than knowledge. I was chasing power. Not the kind that bosses people around, the kind that lets you say, "I will never be powerless again." One day, during a college fair, I walked up to a booth for a university no one even knew how to pronounce. Johns Hopkins. Their pre-med program was famous, ruthless, nearly impossible to get into. The woman behind the booth raised an eyebrow at my beat-up sneakers and faded backpack. "Do you have any questions?" she asked. "Just one," I said. How do I become someone who doesn't need saving? She smiled, handed me a pamphlet. Then you better be ready to save others. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. I stayed up applying to every scholarship I could find, wrote essays until my fingers cramped, poured my entire story into every sentence minus the darkest parts. Not because I was ashamed, but because my story wasn't over yet. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. I had earned a full scholarship. Clara cried when I told her. I knew you'd make it, she said. You just had to believe you deserved it. I think that was the first time I actually did. My last night at home before college, I sat at the edge of my bed with the acceptance letter in one hand and a picture in the other. It was the only photo I had left of me and my father. I was 5. He was holding me up on his shoulders, grinning like the world belonged to us. I burned it, not out of hatred, out of liberation, because that man no longer existed in my life, and the next time we crossed paths, if ever I would be unrecognizable, foster kid, orphan, burden. These were the names I carried, but I was about to earn a new one. Doctor, and not just any doctor. The one who would hold life and death in her hands, and someday his life would rest in mine. They say med school breaks you before it builds you. They're right. The first time I held a scalpel, my hand shook so badly I nicked my glove. The first time I watched a man flatline on the table, I froze. The first time I heard a mother scream because her child didn't make it, I almost walked away, almost, but I didn't, because the same pain that nearly destroyed me had now become my compass. T20. I was younger than most of my peers in med school. A few professors thought I got in because of my backstory pity points. They called them. They didn't see the nights I slept with textbooks under my pillow, or the 14-hour shifts at the trauma ward just so I could absorb everything like a sponge. They didn't see how I kept my own spine upright with steel, literally and emotionally. I wore compression braces under my coat every day, the scars from my accident still fresh, still angry. But I didn't hide them. They were my armor. Most of my classmates went home for holidays. I stayed on campus, not because I didn't have a home. Clara's door was always open, but because I was afraid if I slowed down, I'd lose momentum, fall apart, drown in the memories. One night, during my 3rd year, I was shadowing in the during a night shift when a patient came in, a teenager. She had been hit by a drunk driver. Broken ribs, crushed lung, spinal fracture. It was me. Not literally, of course. But when I looked down at her chart, I could feel my pulse quicken. My hands went cold, but I didn't freeze. I stood over her, gave orders, stabilized her vitals, and when the lead doctor finally looked up at me and said, "You saved her," something inside me clicked. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a surgeon. One morning, I received an email that made me stop breathing for a second. Congratulations for residency at St. Martin's Hospital Emergency Trauma Department. The same hospital where I was left on that gurney. The same hallways where I nearly died alone. I stared at the screen for a long time. Was it fate? Coincidence? Or some twisted full circle moment the universe had planned for me? Whatever it was, I accepted without hesitation. The first day, I walked back into those sterile, white hallways in a crisp white coat, my ID badge heavy around my neck. I almost couldn't breathe. The place hadn't changed much. Same linoleum floors, same fluorescent lighting, same faint smell of antiseptic and regret. But I wasn't the same girl. who had been wheeled in here, half dead and unwanted. Now, I had the power, not just to survive but to lead. A few months into residency, I was promoted early to team lead in trauma due to a last-minute emergency where I had to perform a solo thoracotomy on a construction worker pinned under metal beams. No one else had gotten there in time. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. And after that, the staff started calling me Stone Hands. Not because I was cold, but because I never trembled. I never told anyone about my past. Not at SD. Martin's, not. Even when I passed the exact room I had flatlined in years ago, I just kept my head down, let the scalpel do the talking, and saved lives like I was repaying a debt I never agreed to owe. But inside, I was waiting for the one life I didn't know whether I'd save or let go. I didn't know when that moment would come, but I knew it would. Because life always has a way of coming back around, I was no longer that broken girl on the emergency table. I had become something else, a weapon, a healer, a storm in scrubs, and one day soon, my father would come through those doors, bleeding, helpless and terrified, just like I had once been, and this time I would be the one standing over him. 3 years into my residency, the hospital had become my second skin. By then, I knew the sound of a crashing patient before the monitors even beeped. I knew what color the nurses' faces turned just before they called a code blue, and I knew without even thinking how to stitch together a body ripped open by metal, glass, or fate. But nothing could have prepared me for the day he came back into my life. It was a Sunday morning. Early, quiet. Thea was in that rare lull between chaos and disaster. I was sipping black coffee in the trauma bay when the emergency doors flew open. Male, mid-50s, suspected MI. Vitals crashing. GCS score 9. No, it came in with a good Samaritan. The EMT rattled off. Prep trauma 1, I said, standing up. Call cardiology, but we might not have time. I pulled on my gloves. I didn't look at the patient's face right away, just focused on the vitals, the pale skin, the signs of cardiac arrest. Classic heart failure. He needed epinephrine, a crash cart, and a chance. Then one of the nurses said something that made my stomach clench. Doctor. I think he said his name was Gerald. Gerald? That name hadn't been spoken in my presence in almost a decade. My eyes flicked to the patient's chart. No last name. But I knew that face. Even under the oxygen mask, bloated with age and sickness, I knew. My hands froze mid-motion. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Every breath I took felt like it burned. It was him, my father. Time slowed. I stared down at the man who had once stood at the foot of my gurney and told a nurse I wasn't worth saving. Now he was the one on the table, bleeding, pale, dying, and I was the only one who could save him. The team was prepping defibrillators. A nurse turned to me, waiting for instructions. Dr. Lin? That's what they called me now. Dr. Eden Lin, my mother's last name. I had legally changed it years ago. I blinked once, twice, then snapped into action. Charge to 200. We're going in. We started the process like any other trauma case. I gave the orders, applied pressure, monitored the EKG. I went through the motions like a well-oiled machine, but inside me, chaos was blooming. He coded. Of course he did. We hit him with the paddles. Once, twice, flatline. I heard the monitor screech in that long, unforgiving beep, the sound that usually meant we'd lost call time, one of the interns whispered. But I didn't, not Yet, instead, I reached out and grabbed the defibrillator myself. Again, I said. One more. They hesitated. Now I barked. The paddles connected. His body arched off the table. Then, silence. Then beep. 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 A pulse. I had saved him. Narrator's voice tight, barely controlled. I saved him. The man who abandoned me. The man who said I wasn't worth it. The man who chose to walk away while I bled out on the very floor I now stood on. But here's the cruel part. He had no idea who I was. He was stabilized, moved into recovery. I stood outside his room for a long time, watching through the glass. He looked smaller than I remembered. Weaker. Lost. Life had worn him down. His hair was grayer, his skin thinner, the lines on his face carved deeper than before. And yet, I could still see the coldness in his expression. Even half-conscious, he looked like a man used to dismissing things. Like he still believed he had the right to control the narrative. Only this time, I held the pen. I didn't go in right away. I waited, because I wanted the moment to be mine. That night, I stayed at the hospital past my shift. I couldn't stop watching the monitor in his room. Watching it beep. Watching his heart, a heart I saved, keep beating because of me. It was the most surreal feeling I'd ever known. Like I was looking into a mirror. Not one that showed my face. One that showed who I could have become if I had let the pain define me. That man my father left me to die. Now, I had brought him back to life. But I didn't do it for him. I did it because I'm not him, because I'm better than him, because no one, not even the man who shattered me, gets to dictate who I become. But tomorrow, he would wake up. And when he did, I'd be standing there, right beside his bed, and I would make him remember everything. I didn't sleep the night before he woke up. I sat on the bench outside his ICU room for hours watching nurses come and go, hearing the hum of machines that were now keeping him alive. Machines I had once been hooked up to. Machines I had almost died under. He hadn't woken yet. Sedated. Safe. But not for long. I stared through the glass. My reflection barely visible on the surface, layered over his still frame. It was surreal, this moment I had imagined so many times, but no fantasy could prepare me for the reality of it. The next morning, I stood by his bedside when he stirred. He blinked slowly. Groggy. Disoriented. He turned his head, winced, looked up at me. Where am I? His voice cracked like it hadn't been used in years. You're at St. Martin's, I replied, steady and calm. You had a heart attack. We stabilized you. He blinked again, struggling to make sense of the words. Then he squinted at me. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Or maybe just discomfort. I said nothing. I just waited. Then he asked, "Are you my doctor?" A long pause. And then I slowly took off my surgical mask. I watched as his face went pale, not from pain or sickness, but realization. His eyes widened. He knew. Eden, he rasped, voice cracking. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at him, let him choke on the weight of my name, let him swim in the memories he had tried to bury. The gurney, the nurse, the moment he chose to walk away. Finally, I answered. Yes, Dr. Eden Lin, your attending physician. He looked stunned, almost terrified, and good. He should be terrified. You're a doctor, he said, as if it were unthinkable. Yes, I replied coolly. I save lives now. He looked away, shame darkening his face. Or was it confusion? I didn't know. I didn't think you didn't think I was worth it, I cut in. My voice was calm, but my hands were clenched behind my back. He flinched. The truth hit harder than any drug in his foreline. You left me, I said, on that table, bleeding, dying. You looked at me and said, she's not worth it. And then you walked away. He opened his mouth, like he might argue. I didn't let him. You didn't even come back. Not to check in. Not to apologize. Not to see if I survived. He croaked. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle it. You were always so difficult, and your mother don't, I snapped. Don't you dare bring her into this. There was a silence that stretched too long. The heart monitor beeped in the background, slow and steady, keeping time with his guilt. I was a mess back then, he whispered. You don't understand what I was going through, and yet I do, I said, because I went through worse. And I didn't abandon anyone. Tears welled in his eyes, but I didn't care. He hadn't earned his tears yet. You left me to die, I said, voice like glass. And the irony is, I'm the one who saved your life. He closed his eyes. Why, he whispered. Why did you save me? I leaned in slightly, inches from his face. Because I am not you. I could have let him die, and no one would have known. I had every justification, every excuse, but I didn't, because I refused to let him turn me into the kind of person he was. Because strength isn't in revenge, it's in restraint. But that didn't mean I was going to forgive him. Forgiveness is earned, and some debts run deeper than blood. I stood up, smoothed my coat, and turned toward the door. As I reached it, I paused. You've got a second chance, I said over my shoulder. Don't waste it like you wasted your first. And with that, I walked away, leaving him with the truth, leaving myself with peace. After I left his room, I didn't look back, not at the man who had once turned his back on me, not at the past, but the truth is, the past has a funny way of following you. You think you've buried it, you think you've outrun it, but it shows up unexpected, uninvited, and knocks at your door like it never left. And this time, it brought family. 3 days passed after my father regained consciousness. I kept my distance, professionally and personally. My attending duties were wrapped up. He had a new team handling him now, but whispers traveled quickly in hospitals. I wasn't surprised when Nurse Alina pulled me aside and said, "Your aunt is here. And she's asking for you, Aunt Maribel, my father's older sister." She was one of the few people who knew exactly what had happened the night I was left on that table, but said nothing. Just like the rest of them, I met her in the family consultation room. She looked exactly the same. Tailored coat, blood-red lipstick, a thick gold chain, and judgment in her eyes. "You look different," she said, slowly appraising me like I was a sculpture she couldn't quite figure out. "I am different," I replied. "I heard you saved your father's life," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "I did." She paused. Why? I tilted my head. "Because I'm not the kind of person who leaves people on operating tables." Her jaw tensed. She knew that was coming. Then she softened her voice, tried to reach for some fake warmth. "Eden, your father was under stress back then. Your mother had just stopped," I interrupted. "I don't need a recap of your family spin doctoring. I was there, remember?" She sighed. "You have to understand. He thought you were already gone, that the trauma would be too much." He wasn't thinking clearly. "No," I said, voice sharp. He was thinking clearly. He looked me in the eye and decided I wasn't worth the fight. That's the part no one wants to admit. She looked down at her hands, silent, caught. I didn't come here to argue, she said eventually. I came here because he wants to see you. I've seen him, I replied flatly. That's enough. He's asking for you, Eden. Over and over. And he's not doing well? I stood up. He wasn't doing well back then either. But nobody asked for me. She reached out as I turned to go. Please, just talk to him. He says he's sorry. I turned halfway, just enough for her to see my face. Let me make something very clear. I don't need an apology. I needed a father. He made a choice. And now, so have I. They thought guilt could buy back trust, that a few words could glue together years of broken silence. But I wasn't a little girl anymore. I was a woman who had built a life from the ashes they left behind, and sometimes you don't go back to the fire just because the people who started it are cold now. That evening, I walked through the hospital garden, the place where we sometimes brought critical patients' families to breathe. I sat on the bench I used to cry on years ago, when I was a medical intern and the pressure almost broke me, and I thought about the people who had been there for me when my family wasn't. Alina, Dr. Voss, my foster mentor, Clara, the ones who had chosen me when my own blood had turned away. That's what family really is, isn't it? Not DNA, but choice and consistency. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A message from the nurse desk. Patient Lynn is declining rapidly. Comfort measures being discussed. He's asking for you by name. I stared at the screen, felt nothing at first, then a tightness in my chest, but not grief, just something unfinished, like a song that ended mid-verse. I stood up slowly. The garden lights flickered behind me, and I whispered to the night air, "All right, let's finish this." Room 412 was too still, too quiet for a man who had once made so much noise in my life through his anger, his silence, his absence. He looked smaller in the bed now, not just physically, but like his power had shrunk with time and consequence. Wires tangled across his chest, monitors hummed with indifference. He turned his head when I stepped in, and for the first time in over a decade, he smiled. A weak, broken thing, but a smile. "Eden," he rasped. I stood just beyond the foot of the bed. "I'm here. I didn't think you'd come," he said, coughing through the words. "I didn't think I would either." He closed his eyes briefly. "They told me you saved my life." "I did. That's my job." A pause. Then, "I'm sorry. I didn't move, didn't respond." I let those two words hang in the sterile air between us, like old cobwebs on a forgotten photo. He struggled to speak again. "That night, I was scared. You were a parent," I said, voice cool. "You don't get to be scared. You get to show up." His eyes glistened. I thought you were gone." I didn't know what to do." "No, you knew what to do. You just chose not to." The monitor beeped softly. He looked down at the 4 in his hand. "I've had a long time to think, Eden, and yet you still waited until your lungs failed to say anything." He winced, not from pain, but from truth. "I failed you," he whispered. "I know that now." I stepped closer, but only by a foot. "You didn't just fail me. You abandoned me." His eyes didn't flinch. He took it in, this version of me he didn't know, this version who had clawed her way to everything he said she'd never become. "Your mother," he began, but I cut him off. "Don't," he stopped. "She's gone," I said. "And if you're here to shift blame or rewrite history, save your breath." He nodded weakly. "No excuses. Just regrets. I studied him, this man I had once idolized, who used to carry me on his shoulders, who called me his little shadow. Until the day I stopped being convenient, you taught me a lot. I said finally, not how to love, or how to trust, but how to survive without either. He blinked, slowly. Tears slid down the sides of his face. You became more than I ever imagined, he whispered. I took a breath. No thanks to you. I know. Silence. Then, like a confession scraped from the deepest pit of his soul, I waited too long, didn't I? Yes, I said. You did. I stayed for 10 more minutes. No more words. No more apologies. Just the quiet knowing that sometimes closure doesn't come in the form of reconciliation. Sometimes it's just being able to look them in the eye and walk away without flinching. And that's exactly what I did. I walked out of room 412 for the last time, and I didn't look back. Back in the hallway, Alina was waiting. She handed me a cup of coffee. I heard. I nodded. It's done. Are you okay? She asked. I stared down the corridor. The empty chairs, the humming lights, the life that continued beyond broken families. No, I said. But I will be. That night, I went home and did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out the old photo album I had locked away. The one with pictures of a little girl with skinned knees and crooked pigtails, and her father laughing beside her before the world changed. I looked at that girl, and I whispered to her, you deserved better. Sometimes revenge doesn't come with fireworks. It comes in moments like this when you realize the pain didn't destroy you, that you rose, that you chose healing, that your silence was never weakness, it was power waiting for the right moment to speak. And when it did, it echoed through every room they left you in. The strange thing about closure, it doesn't come with confetti. There's no applause. In award. Sometimes all it gives you is the quiet clarity to stand up, shake off the weight of the past, and simply breathe. And that's what I did. A week after I walked out of room 412, I found myself driving down to the coast. No destination. No plan. Just me, the open road, and the hum of everything I'd been too busy surviving to hear. Alina called me on the third day. Are you coming back? I don't know, I said. Maybe. She paused. You know you're missed, right? I know. I stopped at a quiet beach town no one had ever heard of. Bought a room with a window that overlooked the sea. Every morning, I sat by the shore with a notebook and pen. No expectations, just words, memories, pieces of the girl I had been and the woman I had become. I wrote about Emoem, about how her smile could light up a kitchen, how her fear of losing me became the very thing that made her do exactly that. I wrote about Dad, how his silence was louder than any scream, how the hospital visit didn't erase the nights I cried into a pillow he never noticed. But I also wrote about me, Ed, who never gave up, who became a trauma nurse because she knew what it was like to be left on the table, who learned to save others the way no one had saved her. On the 10th day, I got a letter forwarded by Alina. No return address, just shaky handwriting on the front. Inside, a note from my father. Eden, you were always the strongest. I just didn't know how to see it. I hope you forgive me one day. Or if you can't, I understand. I just wanted you to know I was proud. Always. Even when I didn't act like it. Dad, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just folded the letter and placed it in the back of my notebook. Not because he earned forgiveness, but because I didn't need the anger anymore. I had survived it, and now I was writing the next chapter on my own terms. Back in the hospital weeks later, Alina greeted me with a hug. Feels different now, doesn't it? I nodded. It does. I walked past room 412 again. It was empty. New patient, new story, but I no longer carried the weight of what it used to mean. Some people spend their lives waiting for others to validate their worth. But here's what I've learned: you don't need an apology to move forward. You don't need their love to build your life. You just need to know that who you are, who you fought to become, is enough. More than enough. I didn't get my fairytale family. I didn't get justice in the form of payback or perfect words. But I got freedom, and in the end, that was the greatest revenge of all. The chapters of my life that were written in pain didn't define me, they refined me. I became the woman who healed others because she learned how to heal herself. The doctor who saved strangers, friends, and even the man who once left her to die. But most importantly, I became the author of my own story. Since that day at St. Martin's, I've dedicated myself to trauma medicine with a fierce purpose. I mentor young nurses and doctors who come from broken homes. I advocate for patients who arrive alone, afraid, and forgotten. And I speak openly about resilience, the quiet strength it takes to survive family wounds and still choose kindness. People often ask me if I forgave him. The truth is, forgiveness is not a moment. It's a journey, and mine is ongoing. I'm learning that forgiveness isn't about excusing the past. It's about freeing yourself from the chains of bitterness. I've also learned that family isn't always who shares your blood. It's those who show up, who stay, who hold your hand when everything falls apart. For me, that family was Clara, Alina, my colleagues, and the countless patients whose stories intertwine with mine. They taught me how to trust again, how to love, how to live. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this: your past doesn't dictate your future. Your wounds don't limit your worth, and sometimes the greatest love you can find is the love you give yourself. As or wherever you are, whatever pain you carry, remember, you are not alone. You are stronger than you think, and your story is still being written. Thank you for listening. I'm Edelyn, and this was my journey from abandonment to healing.